Welcome back to the deep dive. You know that feeling, right? That mix of pleasure and pressure when you're trying to find the perfect gift for someone.
Oh, absolutely.
We all connect gift giving with sentiment, with affection, and let's be honest, that late December shopping rush. But what if that feeling of pressure, that sort of obligation, is actually the oldest part of the whole tradition?
That's at the core of it, really.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into the sources you've pulled together to trace how this all evolved. Our mission is to show that today's sentimental gestures are actually deeply rooted in practical necessity and ritual and these ancient systems of social obligation.
We're going way, way back, long before Christmas as we know it.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When we look at the timeline, the exchange of objects somehow became heavily associated with the winter season. Why there? Why then?
Well, what's so fascinating is that the sources show modern gift-giving isn't from one single origin. It's not one religious event.
It's more complicated.
Much more. It really came about through all these overlapping cultural practices. I mean, think of it like a core sample from the earth. At the very bottom, you have pure survival.
Okay.
Then a layer of social contracts, then ritual, and then only at the very top do you get modern commerce. What started as a really practical, almost contractual response to darkness and scarcity, it just morphed over time.
And that contrast between a contract and a sentiment, that feels like the first big surprise here. We think of giving a gift as this voluntary emotional choice. But the sources suggest for early societies it was anything but.
Precisely. If you strip away all that modern emotional stuff, the ancient act of giving was a structured, almost required social
Requirement.
Yes, it wasn't about finding that perfect item that proves you know someone. It was social infrastructure. It was the tech that kept the whole community running.
Infrastructure. That sounds so cold, so transactional. I mean, if it was purely infrastructure like a social payment, how do we account for the personal effort that must have gone into it? You know, making a tool or preserving food. Wasn't there always some emotional piece to it?
There was an emotional investment, sure, but the primary function was obligation. Think of it less like currency and more like, say, social credit.
Line of credit.
Exactly. The sequence of giving, receiving, and this is the most important part, reciprocating, was essential for keeping alliances and hierarchies in place. It was a visible ledger of who owed what to whom. The sources really stress that gifts bound people together.
So giving a gift wasn't showing affection as much as it was creating an expectation.
You were creating an expectation, and this was serious. In these systems, failing to give a gift back wasn't just rude, it could mean social death.
Why?
It marked you as unreliable, someone outside the safety net. So the big takeaway here is that winter festivals didn't invent gift giving. They just absorbed and intensified this older system that was already there.
That reframes everything. So the practice was already humming along in the background, like a social operating system, and then winter comes and just cranks the volume way up.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, connecting this practical thing directly to the environment. I mean, for us, in our heated homes with supermarkets, we forget that for most of humanity, winter was the single greatest threat.
It was an existential threat. Scarcity, isolation, sickness, death. It was the ultimate annual stress test for a community.
So in response to that, cultures developed these intense winter rituals.
Rituals centered on redistribution and mutual aid. It was a kind of collective enforced insurance policy. You had to participate.
So exchanging things in winter wasn't about abundance, it was about proving you were still part of the pack.
Exactly. The exchange was a visible sign that survival was collective, not individual. So the gifts themselves were, overwhelmingly practical.
You're talking food, fuel.
Preserved food, animal hides for warmth, fuel, crucial tools. The goal was endurance. You weren't giving a trinket. You were giving something that could literally keep another family alive until spring.
And it wasn't a one-off thing, right? This reinforced dependence over the whole season.
Right. It was a constant reminder. We gave you this, you owe us, and because of this cycle, we will all survive.
That completely shifts the perspective. Okay, so we have this bedrock of social obligation tied to survival. How did that get formalized into something celebratory, into the patterns we so recognize? Let's look at Roman Saturnalia.
Saturnalia is a great example. It was celebrated in mid-December, and it really formalized this winter exchange. It turned a simple act of necessity into this huge public festival.
And it functioned as a kind of pressure release valve.
That's what's crucial about it. It was a ritual designed to restore order by, strangely enough, allowing for temporary structured chaos.
For everything stopped.
Work stopped, the normal rules were relaxed, and social hierarchies were symbolically flipped. Masters would serve their servants. This whole temporary reversal was meant to appease Saturn, the god of renewal, and make sure a good harvest would come back.
And in the middle of all this chaos, they gave gifts. The sources mention they were modest, right? Like figurines and candles. That seems like a huge jump from food and fuel.
It does, but that's a really important point. The true practical exchange during Saturnalia was the huge communal feast and the relaxation of debts. That's what kept people from starving.
Ah, so the figurines and candles were on top of that.
They were supplementary. The candles were pretty obvious. They symbolized the return of light in the darkest time of year. And the figurines, they were called sigillaria. They were just small tokens that emphasized social connection during this period of unity.
So they weren't about value, they were about reinforcing the social bond.
Exactly. Saturnalia basically set the pattern. The midwinter timing, the use of symbolic tokens, and this idea that the exchange itself is what reinforces your belonging to the group.
That pattern is incredibly powerful. But if we go further north in Europe, things get a bit darker, don't they? I'm thinking of the pre-Christian Yule. Did the more intense darkness up there make the whole thing more ritualistic?
Absolutely. The Yule celebrations were fundamentally different. They weren't a civic festival like in Rome. The northern traditions were deeply tied to loyalty, to fate, and to the very real presence of ancestors and other forces.
So the gifts themselves meant more.
They carried real ritual weight. These weren't just tokens. They could function as binding oaths, as promises, or even as literal magical protections against what was to come.
So giving a gift was a deadly serious act.
It was a non-sentimental exchange. You were essentially negotiating with time itself and with the dead to make sure your family would make it through another cycle.
It's almost more of a sacrifice than a sentiment. But what's so striking here is that this kind of material gift-giving wasn't universal. And the sources have this perfect counterpoint with the Iranian traditions.
And that contrast is essential. It shows how culturally specific our Western traditions really are. While Romans and Northern Europeans were exchanging objects to manage resources and debts, the Iranian observances, Shab-i Yalda, focused on something else entirely.
They focused on shared presence.
Exactly. Their tradition is all about gathering, storytelling, poetry, and sharing food, especially fruits like watermelon and pomegranate that symbolize the sun.
And the goal was just to stay awake.
To stay awake through the longest night, to symbolically resist the darkness through community and companionship. Abundance was expressed through shared time, not stuff. There was very little emphasis on creating that reciprocal material debt.
Which shows our modern tradition is just one path that could have been taken.
A path shaped very heavily by those Roman and Northern European needs.
Okay, so we have these ancient, distinct, very functional systems all clustered around winter. And then this massive religious reframing arrives with Christianity. It didn't get rid of these customs.
It couldn't. They were too deeply embedded, so it did something much smarter. It absorbed them. It remoralized them.
How did it do that?
Well, strategically, the timing of Christ's birth was aligned with this winter season that was already packed with ritual meaning. So the practice of gift-giving stayed, but its meaning was redirected.
Towards charity, humility.
Exactly. The whole mechanism of giving was kept in place, but the frame changed. What was once a reciprocal obligation to your neighbor became framed as voluntary generosity, often tied to the Magi giving gifts to the infant Christ. It was a genius move that neutralized the pagan origins by giving the practice a new, higher purpose.
A fascinating pivot from a negotiation with fate to an expression of faith. But we can't talk about how it all became modern without that final huge shift. So let's fast forward a few centuries to the Industrial Revolution.
And this is where we get the final transformation. This is where it goes from a survival mechanism to an emotional and economic engine.
Mass production, advertising.
The combination of industrial mass production, new ways to transport goods, and most importantly, targeted advertising just fundamentally changed everything.
So it went from a public communal ritual to something private.
To a system of private consumption and emotional display. Advertising took that deep, ancient social pressure, that feeling of obligation, and merged it with the new reality of factory-made goods.
And the sources show they didn't sell the item, they sold the feeling. Historical figures like Sinterklaas were repurposed from these judges of behavior into idealized gift bringers.
Exactly. The focus moved from giving tools for endurance to giving commodities to show affection, and of course to show your economic status. The Christmas shopping season became this invented, highly structured event designed to move inventory.
The old social debt was just replaced with the expectation of a material display.
And yet, what's remarkable is that even with all that economic overhaul, the old layers are still there. They're still completely visible.
It's still at the darkest time of year.
Still emphasizes family. And crucially, the gifts still carry this intense symbolic weight that's way more than their dollar value. These are direct echoes of those ancient practices.
So what does this all mean for us today? That carefully wrapped gift, the stress of finding the perfect item, it's all just a long, winding history lesson in disguise.
It is. What we call gift giving is not some timeless invention tied purely to the holidays. It's the product of thousands of years of survival strategies, social contracts, ritual, and cultural adaptation, all layered on top of each other.
So every time we exchange a gift in winter, we're echoing humanity's oldest response to the cold.
You're echoing that profound need for collective continuity.
It really makes my anxiety about picking out a shirt seem a little misplaced, knowing my ancestors were worried about being cast out of the tribe. We are still, whether we realize it or not, performing these acts of social reinforcement. The question for you is, next time you select a gift, are you primarily expressing genuine, voluntary affection, or are you unconsciously fulfilling a very old, very deep social obligation from an ancient accounting ledger? Something to think about the next time you hear that cash register ring.